If we were lucky, we might just get out alive, but what waited on the other side would be possibly my toughest challenge yet. Hello, and welcome to all Dente Creepypasta, horror stories cooked to perfection with a splash of red sauce. My name is CZ, and today we'll be serving you on the beach, so kick back, relax, and enjoy these vacation horror stories. Let's dig right in.
Number 1. Island Adventure. A woman at the airport had asked me if I was looking forward to my vacation. To simply say yes would have been an understatement. I had to work overtime for 5 months in order to afford to get here. Then I had to find time off work and get off at the same time as my boyfriend. We had to research the perfect resort on the perfect island with the perfect weather. But we made it. Nothing else was between me, the warm tropical sunshine, a cold, refreshing margarita, and the relaxing sound of waves crashing on the sand in front of me and carelessly rolling back out into the sea. As I dug my toes into the soft sand and laid back on my beach chair, I thought about all the possibilities that awaited us here at the Grand Maritime Beach Resort. Kayaking through the ocean breeze, living the high life at the offshore casino, backpacking the expansive rainforest by moonlight, or regenerating my body at the luxury poolside spa. Maybe I'd even try scuba diving, though I wasn't sure I liked the idea of breathing through a tube. I think before any of that, though, I'd just kick back on the beach and enjoy some sunlight. We'd had a long trip, and it felt good to just drop our bags, slip into a bikini, and take in the saltwater aroma. I could feel myself starting to fade off, too.
Lucy, you okay?
Yeah. I just fell asleep. What time is it?
About 2. You were tired. You look dead.
Thanks.
I was just going up to the bar. Do you want anything to drink?
You could grab me a pina colada, I guess.
Okay.
He kissed me and headed off to the bar. Before I could doze off again, a strange little man came walking down the beach with a clipboard. He looked like one of the locals, a bit of an oddball one at that. He went from chair to chair, making his way up to where I was. When he arrived, he asked if I was interested in going on an island adventure. He explained that it would include backpacking in the rainforest, ziplining, roasting food by a campfire, and bathing in a private waterfall grotto. The clipboard included photos of what looked like an absolutely amazing time to me, so I told him it looked perfect and I wanted to sign my boyfriend and I up for it. He told me to follow him down the beach to the activity shack so I could make a reservation. I dipped my feet in the water as we strolled the length of the shore, but the man kept rushing me along. I didn't think much of it at the time, just assuming he was impatient. That should have been my first of many red flags. Next, we walked off the property of the resort. I asked if the expedition was included in the resort package. He told me it was, and I had no reason to believe otherwise. We finally get down to the little hut. All I remember was it being completely empty and not really looking like an activity shack at all. The guy quickly apologized and told me that the activity director must have already headed up to the site to begin preparing for the excursion. I was starting to get pretty annoyed at this point and told him I better walk back and let my boyfriend know. But he assured me that the site was just across the street and it would only be a couple more minutes. I was reluctant but didn't want to be rude since he insisted. Besides, it would be good for me to get to scope out where we would be exploring. So we made our way inland. I had to run across the street barefoot, no crosswalk. This led us directly into the rainforest, and when we got there, I started to get a bad feeling. There was no set path we were following. He was just leading me deeper into the forest. The other thing that set me off at this point was the complete lack of other tourists. I thought for sure we'd see other couples signing up as well, but scratch that. It wasn't just a lack of other tourists. It was a lack of people. There was nobody out here. Just me and this guy who randomly approached me on the beach. I had no real idea that he actually worked for the resort. He was kind of scraggly and unkempt. Certainly not up to the standards of grooming we had seen at the front desk, but he did look to be an island local like most of the employees we had seen at the resort. And it's not like the island adventure expedition wasn't advertised in the brochures, but something deep inside me said that this wasn't the real thing. I got more and more nervous. I was honestly thinking about turning and running, but the only thing that stopped me from doing it was how embarrassing it would be if this was legit, because there was still some doubt in my mind. Besides, it's not like I'd make it very far with no shoes and no idea where I was going. I debated doing it anyway in my head when something emerged in the distance. Another man was standing out there, veiled by a layer of fog and facing slightly away from us. Relief washed over me when the guy I was with called out to him in another language, and the guy came up to us. Realistically, it was just a couple minutes, just as he had told me back at the activity shack. Before I could feel silly for doubting him, the two men went back and forth in their native tongue. I don't know what they were saying, obviously, but I just know they were talking very quickly. But what was weird was this new guy was staring at me, not making eye contact with the other man. Actually, he wasn't just staring at me. He was eyeing my body, up and down. I felt exposed and uncomfortable, but let's face it, it wasn't the first guy that couldn't keep his eyes off me. It's just that usually they try a little bit to hide it. He continued to fire off questions I couldn't understand. I looked up at the rainforest we'd been exploring. It wasn't exactly as I'd pictured it. How far was the zip line? Where was the waterfall? That's when both of them went quiet. I looked back down at them. Both of them were staring at me. I smiled sheepishly. Then the two men simultaneously grabbed me. I tried to scream, but one of their hands reached over and muffled my mouth, as both of them dragged me down to the ground. I was completely helpless to resist, with the full weight of two bodies crushing me. A hand pinched my nose and closed my nostrils. Tears began to flow, but I couldn't breathe. I was completely powerless. There was nothing I could do. The black started to envelop me from the corners of my vision. Just before I blacked out, I saw something in a blur through my tears, deep in the distance. There was a third person, way back in the trees. It was the last thing I saw before the black crashed in, and I was out. For the second time that day, I awoke in a haze. I thought I never would, but I was alive. It was getting dark out, but we were still in the forest. A different part of the forest. I didn't know how deep in we were. I actually couldn't make out much. My vision was a blur. It was like looking through beer goggles. My right arm felt dead, almost impossible to lift, but with some effort I could move it around and shoo off some of the hundreds of bugs flying right over my body. It didn't do much good. They were everywhere. The two men were sitting by a campfire talking. Clearly they hadn't noticed me wake up. From what I could tell, they were about 10 meters away. There was also a jeep parked nearby too. I felt as if I was hungover and drunk at the same time, but this was my only chance to try to escape, and I knew it. There were just a few problems. I had no idea where I was, how far we were from the beach or from any civilization for that matter. I was not in much condition to run. I still had no shoes, and my bikini was not great for running in to begin with. Normally, I might be more confident. I do jog for 45 minutes almost every day, so I had pretty good endurance. I didn't know what these two men were capable of, though. And then there was that third guy I had seen in the distance. Where was he? Was he one of them? Was he going to be patrolling the perimeter? Before I could think of a plan, I saw them turn their back to me and go to the car. This was my chance. I wobbled to my feet. I didn't break into a full sprint right away, trying to strike a balance between speed and stealth. As I got further from the campfire, it got very dark. Even just a few meters ahead of me was starting to look pitch black. It wasn't long before I stepped on something hard and rough. It rolled me off my feet and I went crashing to the ground. Shoot. I heard their yelling out in the distance as they realized I was gone. I pulled myself to my feet, feeling even woozier than before. I heard the Jeep start somewhere in the background. The headlights flared up behind me, so I scrambled my way up the nearest bump in the terrain and ducked out behind it, doing my best not to move a muscle. The area lit up as the vehicle turned around and headed in my direction. It pretty much mowed over the low-lying vegetation as it tore over the bumpy terrain and headed straight for me. They didn't see me. The Jeep passed and I was safe for a little while longer. I figured I'd have to develop a strategy so I could continue in one direction as to not send myself in circles. I decided to go perpendicular to the way they had just driven. That way, if they tried to comb the area, it will take them a long time to get to me. I got to my feet and set off, but then I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't loud. I wasn't even entirely sure I had heard it at all, until I heard it again. There were footsteps, probably a good 30 meters or so. My head was still spinning and I couldn't exactly tell which direction they were coming from. Once again, I had to reassess my situation. I looked around. Absolutely no light, other than the faint moon's glow. I couldn't make out where the footsteps were coming from, or who they were coming from. What if only one of them had gotten in the car? Or could this be that third person I had seen in the distance? It could be a random person for all I knew. It might be worth calling out for help, but if it was one of them... I didn't have time to sit and think about it. The footsteps were getting louder. I decided to try and quietly move away. It was getting harder to get around, though. Not only was it dark, but my vision was swirling more and more. It seemed like the more ground I covered, the louder the other footsteps got. The anxiety, the swirling headache, the sick feeling I had, all of it was getting to me. Before I knew what had happened, I collapsed. I laid on the ground, breathing heavily. The last thing I saw this time was a pair of boots on the ground in front of me. They walked up and stopped just before my face. I couldn't go on. I felt myself start to fade once again.
Number 2. International Waters. Molly, come on! They're leaving! I called back my wife as she waddled down the dock in her high heels. What's the point? I thought to myself. We were going to miss it. It was already 3 minutes past 2. The boat should have left by now. Sure enough, just as we got to the end of the dock, the ship pulled away and headed out to sea. If only she hadn't taken so long to get ready.
Oh no, shoot. I'm sorry, Tom. Just missed it too.
Come on, we can still enjoy the poolside bar for a few more hours while the sun's still up. I turned back towards the mainland. Then I heard a voice behind me. It came from one of the island locals who was sitting at the end of the pier. Apparently, there was going to be a smaller shuttle boat that would take people out to the casino in about an hour. Perfect for us. I made sure next time we were waiting out there 15 minutes early. Right at 3 p.m., the same guy from the dock earlier pulled up in a tiny speedboat. He helped us aboard. Then once we were seated, he fired up the engine. I asked him if we were going to have to wait for any other guests. He told us we were the only ones. So just like that, we took off. The sea breeze whipped through our hair as the island behind us got smaller and smaller in the distance. Molly grabbed onto me for safety as we looked into the sparkling horizon. Eventually, a speck appeared on that horizon, and not long after that, the speck became a boat, the boat upon which we'd be spending the rest of our evening. When we walked in, the place was popping. Blackjack tables, poker, roulette, a disco ball bumping to the beat of the bass, and bottle girls for every table, couch, and lounge chair. It looked like there were more in the rooms beyond as well. We probably spent the first 4 hours in this initial room. I wasn't really keeping track of time, but that was more of an estimate based on the amount of drinks me and my wife had downed. We jumped around from game to game, spending some time together and some apart. I wanted to give one more spin at the roulette table, and I wasn't sure where exactly she had ran off to. I was getting kind of low on chips, and I wondered if she was doing any better. I noticed the guy next to me had a huge stack of chips, the most I had seen anyone with the entire night. I inquired about where he had all the good luck, and he told me he made almost all of his earnings in the private rooms. He went on to explain that the casino operates offshore because what goes on in the private rooms is very illegal, but not in international waters. I asked if he had any tips. He told me to stay calm, be logical, and don't do anything rash. He said you can make a lot of money there, but you have to know when it's a good time to sit back and observe, and when it's a good time to punch it and buy in high. And the last thing he told me was that that room was not for the lighthearted or the morally righteous. I went to go find Molly. The first area beyond the curtain door was a little waiting area with a bouncer. He asked us if we wanted to play in a private room and made sure that we knew we had to stay for the duration of the game. So if we had to use the restroom, to do it now. He reiterated what the one guy had told me about this being a moral ground zero. Then we waited. I hadn't noticed anyone come out of the room, but after we waited for about 20 minutes, the door opened, and we found 2 chairs in front of a bank teller window type of thing, with a little slot, presumably to exchange our chips. Beyond the window was a bigger room with several vertical wall panels made up of gray metal sheets. There was a door in the corner of the room, and a large mirror on each wall. A bright disc-shaped light on the ceiling was the only means of illumination. Someone stepped into the room with us. It was one of their bottle girls. She poured each of us a glass and explained that tonight's game would come in 3 parts. Minimum bet would be 15 credits, and we would be required to place a bet for each game. The first game would require us to bet on who would hang in the longest. Suddenly, I felt a bit of a nasty feeling as I thought about all the warnings of moral values. When it was described to me, I imagined something along the lines of the board game Sorry, where you had to bump off the other players to win. I hadn't even anticipated the possibility of a survival game. So you can imagine my relief when they wheeled 5 horizontal bars into the room beyond our window. I guess my wife had gotten the same idea.
When they said, "Who can hang in the longest," what came to your mind?
I guess I thought we were sponsoring the Hunger Games for a second there. That's when they marched 5 women, completely naked, out onto the floor. My wife glared at me. I told her I honestly had no idea, but she crossed her arms. Each of the women took their place under the bars. My immediate thought was that when I first saw them, they looked tired and disheveled. They certainly didn't seem happy to be there, but given what I thought the circumstances were a minute ago, it didn't bother me as much as it should have.
So we just have to pick to which one can hang on the bar the longest? Seems easy. The lightest one should have the advantage. Second from the right.
Yeah, but what about grip strength?
How would we know what their grip strength is like?
I don't know. Maybe the one on the left? Maybe the one next to her?
This feels so wrong. It's like we're slave traders up here or something.
I could tell that she was half joking, but a small part of me did feel it was wrong. Sitting up here judging these exposed women based on their bodies. Our drinks were refilled and we were given a little card. Without going into too much detail, the card contained odds and buy-in price for each candidate. Our skinny candidate had the best odds, but that also meant she had the biggest buy-in price. So the system they had here was kind of an inverse from what you would expect from a horse track or something similar. We still decided to go for the small chick anyways. I could feel the drink starting to get to me as I counted out how many chips I'd need to put in to bet on her. Once the bets were in, one more of the casino employees went down into the room and dumped a bucket of water onto the floor. The water spread evenly throughout the room, creating a shallow pool all the way around.
What is that for?
I don't know. Maybe it's to make it obvious if someone touches the ground? To be honest, I really had no idea, but soon I would find out. The competition began, and all 5 ladies jumped onto the bar. One of them immediately lost her handle and came crashing to the ground. Her scream was cut short by an electric buzz. She was flailing and freaking out on the ground.
Oh my god.
That's when I realized the true intent of the groundwater. It wasn't to show who had touched the ground. I mean, maybe it was, but the main purpose was a motivation to stay on the bar. There was some kind of an electric current running through the water. Probably not enough to kill, but definitely enough to pack a punch. The poor lady was screeching and desperately trying to get back to the bar, but she didn't have what it takes to hold on. She kept falling and getting shocked, then trying to pull herself back up before falling again. It was hard to watch. After about 20 seconds, the girl next to her went down, and it looked like the surge that went through her was even more violent. She, however, was able to get back up onto the bar and wrap her legs around it in order to avoid further pain. The first woman just wasn't able to pull herself up though. Molly was having difficulty stomaching what she was seeing. She grabbed my hand and gave me a helpless look of concern.
Let's get out of here.
We headed for the exit, but the door was locked. Hey, we're done! Let us out! But we were reminded that we had agreed to stay for the entire game. And I realized that not only would we have to sit there, but we'd also have to place bets and continue to support the degrading, inhumane experiences that were going on down there. What had I gotten us into? Another girl fell and got a short jolt of electricity before hopping and wrapping her legs around the bar for safety. It came down to 2 final girls. Our girl and the more muscular looking girl I had suggested earlier. Our girl started to lose her grip and shifted around to regain her position. But a couple of seconds later, she was wobbling again. She cried out and actually burst into tears while still holding onto the bar. I guess she already knew she was going to lose, but continued to hold on for as long as possible. Before long, she slipped, and I could actually hear her yell out as she did so. Luckily, she only had a few seconds of voltage. The current seemed to shut off, and the last woman let herself down from the bar in safety. The whole thing was maybe a minute and a half, but the first to have fallen was in pain for all of that. She was alive, but she didn't get up right away. Her hair was literally standing up in all directions and her skin was charred like something out of a cartoon. It was just disgusting to watch. Barbaric. But that's probably not a strong enough word to describe the pain she must have been in. Eventually, the room was cleared and a water vacuum was used to dry things up, as the bars were taken out in preparation of the next game. They ended up bringing out these big white yellow rulers, about 4 feet in length, and placing them against the wall. When they brought the women back out, they had on nothing but these knee-high boots, which subsequently latched into the wall, at the knee and at the toe. So their shins were pretty much locked in, parallel to the wall. Our drinks were refilled. We were given another card simply labeled Flexibility. Like before, it gave us odds and a buy-in price for each contestant. I noticed that some of them were the same, but a few had been swapped out. The final 2 girls from the last game were still in there. We again contemplated not betting. We stalled for a few minutes, hoping they would just start the game without our bet. The bottle girl came back and told us there had been a change, and exchanged the card we had for another card. The only difference was they added 1 more contestant. Again, we tried to wait it out without betting, but we were interrupted by a bouncer who burst into the room and told us that we had to hurry up and make a bet. We tried to explain that we were no longer comfortable with it, but it did not help. I realized our best option was just to finish the game and not come back. We soon realized there were only 2 contestants out of the 6 that we can even afford with the chips we had left, and they were the bottom 2 in terms of odds. We went with the cheapest one, wanting to support this heinous game as little as possible. The game started and the object was to bend as far back as possible in a bridge position. The score was measured by how close they could get their hands to their heels. It didn't seem like this game would be nearly as brutal as the last one, but I was unfortunately surprised how close it came. I saw contortions I didn't even think were possible. All of the contestants were able to see each other, and each of them seemed to be trying their hardest. If there was some kind of external motivator in this game, like there was in the last one, I couldn't see what it was, but I could tell none of them wanted to lose. It got to the point that one of the girls was pushing herself so hard that she screamed out and collapsed onto the floor when she wasn't able to go any further. As they continued to strain, There were two clear leaders, the petite girl and the more buff-looking one who were the final two in the previous round. This time the smaller girl came out on top, and her rival slammed her hand on the floor in frustration. Round 2 was over, only one to go. The ladies were pushed to the breaking point, but I was just glad we got through that one, with no one's back being broken. It wasn't even the worst thing in the world. I was hoping that the final round would be more tame, and we could get out of there with somewhat of a lighter conscience. Hopefully, we'd be able to suppress this night and enjoy the rest of our vacation after this. That all went out the window with what happened next though. 5 men came into the room, each carrying a long-nosed rifle gun. But before you ask, no one was shot during the game. But I didn't know that at the time. That's not to say what actually ended up going down wasn't horrifying though. The barrel of each of these guns was painted with a series of rainbow-colored stripes stretching from the tip of the gun inwards. I didn't understand what the meaning of this was until the bottle girl came out and gave us the final card. Printed upon it was the name of the last game, Penetration. I looked at it in disbelief, but before I could even begin to protest, Molly pointed out that with the chips we had left, we couldn't even afford the cheapest buy-in. Maybe this would finally prompt them in kicking us out. We were more than ready to be done with this place. But after we once again failed to place a bet, the bouncer came in to see what was up. We explained our situation and he told us we'd have to get more chips and told my wife to come with him. Minutes later, he came back with a velvet bag and handed it to me. It was filled with tons of chips, way more than what we ever had, more than the guy at the roulette table, more than we could ever probably afford. "Where's my wife?" I asked, but he was already gone. That's when the bottle girl came through one more time, with another card in hand and told me that there's been a change. I turned around and looked into the window into the game room, and what I saw was more upsetting and disturbing than anything I had laid eyes upon that evening. Stripped down and shaking with fear, Molly had joined the lineup of contestants.
Number 3. Isolated Getaway. This isn't easy for me to talk about. If you've ever tried to make long-term plans in a relationship, you'll probably know what it's like. My boyfriend and I had gone out for 2 years and decided to plan a relaxing little getaway. You never think that this kind of thing would happen when you're planning our trip, but we ended up splitting up a month and a half before. Ideally, I would have waited until after the vacation to break up with him, but when I caught him fooling around with his physical therapist, I didn't even wait a day before ending it. Luckily for me, I still had a suite booked at the Grand Maritime Beach Resort. For whatever reason, even though he did all the research and booking, the reservation was made under both of our names with my email address. I figured it would be a good consolation prize for the suffering he put me through. Besides, I wasn't going to let him ruin my much-needed time off. He'd already done enough damage. I'd be enjoying this vacation with or without him. It felt amazing to hop off the plane and stuff my winter jacket into my bag for the rest of the week. I breezed through the airport, at the end of which a short, chubby guy asked me if I needed a ride. I told him that I was looking for the Grand Maritime shuttle, and it turned out that he was the driver. I guess I lucked out because we didn't even have to wait for other passengers. I'd be enjoying that sunshine before I knew it. Once we arrived at the resort, they told me my room wasn't quite ready, but they offered to take my bags and let me enjoy the pool and beach while they made the preparations. To be honest, that's exactly what I wanted. I would worry about unpacking later. I got changed in the bathroom and found myself a poolside chair. The resort was not at all what I remembered my ex describing to me. First, I expected more people. I mean, I was the only one at the pool area. It looked like there were some more people by the beach, but it felt like it should have been much more busy at this time of year. Still, I didn't mind some isolation and time to myself. It was also kind of a shoddy place. I remember it looking much better in the photos. Leave it to my stupid ex to not do the research. Who cares though? I was here, catching some sun and not at work. A couple of loose pool tiles wouldn't change that. I decided to take a look around the resort a bit. Again, I was pretty unimpressed. Actually, it was kind of creepy. It felt as though it hadn't been renovated since the 70s and there was nobody around. It was like exploring the ruins of a forgotten old resort. There was a smaller pool that I came across that was empty and filled with moss. The paintings on the wall were cute. or at least they might have been several years ago. But the paint had chipped away, so that the eyes of the tribal figures were depicted just as empty voids. I felt more like I was in a forbidden temple than a welcoming beach resort. Corroded statues and broken fences were just a couple more clues as to why the place was so empty. There was even a boat on the beach that was turned over in the sand, gutted for parts and covered in graffiti. Perhaps the strangest part about it were the tiny little speakers hidden in rocks around the resort, which were probably the only evidence that the place was actually operational. I decided to just go back to the pool and tan until my room was ready. While I waited, one of the staff came up to me and asked if I was interested in a complimentary massage. That sounded good to me. I followed him into a spa building next to the pool. I laid out face down on the massage table and he began to go to work on my shoulders. It was oddly quiet. No music or anything, just the sound of him breathing and kneading my flesh. It was a bit uncomfortable, but at the same time it felt so good, so I tried to ignore it. Then it got more uncomfortable. The guy just presumably unhooks my bikini and goes to work on the part of my back and sides. I don't usually get a lot of massages, but shouldn't he ask before doing something like that? Then I remembered why I was here, and I thought I should let myself live a little. Someone else came into the room and started talking to the masseuse in a language I couldn't understand. It sounded like he was answering a bunch of questions, and he sounded kind of angry. His voice got louder as he came into the room. It sounded like he was right next to my head, so I opened my eyes and the guy was right there staring at me. I panicked, but I didn't quite know what to do. He started pacing around the room, talking to the guy. I felt like his eyes were locked onto me. My relaxation level dropped fast and my nervousness level was skyrocketing. This guy was unbelievable. But then he actually grabbed my butt. I screamed out, "Hey!" but I couldn't fully turn away without exposing myself. I was just about ready to be done with this massage. Why wasn't the masseuse telling this creep to buzz off? The guy didn't let me go when I yelled at him. What the hell? They just carried on their conversation, only raising their voices. So I started kicking and thrashing my feet and screaming at them to stop. Only problem was, I could raise all the ruckus I wanted, but we all knew that there was probably nobody out there to hear me. I tried to fight my way out, but the masseuse ended my struggle swiftly when he dug his thumbs somewhere into my shoulders as hard as he could. He must have hit some pressure point or something, because that was the last thing I remembered. I was out. I woke up. By the time I remembered what had happened, I realized that I was in a far worse situation. I was on a speedboat zipping through the ocean, accompanied by only that strange man who had violated me. I could see the island off in the distance, and it was only getting further and further away. I jumped out of the boat and swam as fast as I possibly could. I heard the engine die, and the driver turned around as soon as he realized I was gone. Before I knew it, the boat was back in front of me. He told me it was stupid to try to swim back, and that it was further than it looked, and yanked me back into the boat. He was right. I didn't have the stamina to swim all the way back to shore. As I stared off at how far it really was, I saw a resort on the coast that looked far nicer than my own. Why couldn't my stupid ex have done his research and booked that decent place? That's when I realized something. The sign displayed above the resort just barely read in the distance. It said, Grand Maritime Beach Resort.
Number 4. Last Resort. I looked up and saw a ship departing from the dock. A couple of jet ski riders zoomed by the ship's wake, even managing to catch a little air. That looked fun. Maybe I could do a little bit of that later. I dug my toes into the warm sand and looked at my watch. It was 2:03. It seemed like as good a time as any to grab myself a drink. After all, the bar here at the Grand Maritime was complimentary, so why not? Lucy, you okay? I shook my sleeping girlfriend's shoulder lightly to see if she wanted anything.
Yeah. I just fell asleep. What time is it?
About 2. You were tired. You look dead.
Thanks.
I was just going up to the bar. Do you want anything to drink?
You could grab me a pina colada, I guess.
Okay. With that, I kissed her and headed off to the bar. When I got back with the drinks, my girlfriend seemed to have wandered off, so I resumed my position on the lounge chair and stared off at the shoreline for a bit, full of hope that this was going to be the best vacation ever. This was so nice. About 15 minutes went by. Lucy still didn't show up. 10 minutes more. Another 15 minutes. Where had she run off to? there was this old German couple at the chairs behind us. I asked if they'd seen a blonde girl in a black bikini sitting here, and where she might have headed off to. They said they had seen her talking to the survey guy. When I asked who the survey guy was, they told me he was going around from chair to chair with a clipboard, asking people if they'd like to fill out a 15-minute satisfaction survey, and that they'd seen him talking to Lucy. I asked what direction they'd gone, but neither one of them was sure. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. Lucy was not the type to spend 15 minutes filling out a survey, especially on vacation. The next closest person was an attractive young girl sipping on a smoothie by herself. I asked her if she might have seen my girlfriend, possibly with a guy holding a clipboard. She told me she wasn't sure about Lucy, but she may have seen the clipboard guy. According to her, he had been going from chair to chair and had asked her if she wanted to sign up for some kind of island adventure thing, but she had politely declined. Apparently, he was really pushing it, but she just wasn't interested. We were interrupted by a guy who was about my age, wearing long swim trunks.
Excuse me? My apologies for interrupting. I just happened to overhear that you say that you were looking for your girlfriend. My wife seems to have disappeared off this beach earlier this morning when I ran back to the room to get some sunscreen. I've been looking all over and haven't been able to find her.
Yeah, I just went to the bar and came back. She was gone. It's been almost an hour, so I started asking around.
Why don't we both investigate? Knowing my wife, there's probably some spa we don't know about that they've both run off to.
Yeah, you're probably right. Let's go find him. The girl I was talking to said the guy with the clipboard was headed down the beach to the left, so we continued that way.
My name's Mike, by the way.
Gary. We continued asking around. One guy said that he'd seen the survey guy come by, but he told him he wasn't interested. Another couple said they hadn't seen either of them. Then one chick said that some guy had asked her to come down to the activity shack to sign up for some kind of rainforest adventure, and she'd said no. That's when I remembered Lucy and I checking into the hotel. She found this pamphlet with all of these activities. I think she told me she was interested in doing some rainforest hike or something. Mike and I decided to look for this activity shack. We headed down the beach to the end of the resort's property. Well, Mike, I guess this is where we turn back.
I say we continue searching down the beach for this supposed activity shack. I've already searched every inch of the resort for my wife. I'm convinced they're off property somewhere.
I guess I'll walk down a bit further with you. I've got nothing to lose by checking. We continued down the beach until we found an empty shack. It didn't look like an activity shack per se, just more of a little hut. Before moving on, Mike noticed something in the sand. He pulled up and dusted off a clipboard. There was one page on it, an empty spreadsheet with the words Resort Survey crudely printed at the top. We looked at each other. Mike was wide-eyed. He flipped over the paper. The back was completely different, a colored advertisement with bright graphics of ziplining, a campfire, and a waterfall. Something here didn't add up. I only saw 2 pairs of footsteps in the sand heading back out of the activity shack. Instead of leading back to the resort, they led back inland toward a street. Something was not right here. Mike and I headed to the street, where some sand was kicked up onto the pavement. Someone had definitely jaywalked right here, so we headed across the street into a rainforest. We decided to spread out a little bit and cover as much ground as possible. We made sure to stay within an earshot of each other, so when we inevitably got lost, at least we weren't separated from each other. Lucy! Lucy! It seemed like we were totally alone in this forest. It seemed useless. I was about ready to turn and go back. They couldn't be out here, but that's when I heard Mike call out to me.
Gary, over here, come quick.
My heart jolted and I ran over to him.
I was looking around over here, and I saw something way off in the distance. There were 3 figures standing there, 2 men and a woman. I was about to call out to them, when the 2 men jumped the lady and knocked her out. When they noticed me staring, they carried her into a car and sped off. I think it could have been your girlfriend.
I felt a sharp pain of nervousness and excitement in my chest. Could it have been Lucy? I wanted to be close to finding her, but I couldn't stand the idea of her not being okay. We ran over there. There was no real evidence to speak of, but there were tire tracks that we could follow. Not only was it our best bet of finding our women, but it was probably our only bet for finding our way out of here. We ended up following these tracks for 3 full hours. It was getting dark by the time we came across a little campsite. There was a bonfire that had recently been put out. The wood was still charred and I could smell smoke. The tracks continued on from there though, and 30 minutes later we were finally led out of the forest where the tire marks continued on sand. It was a private little beach area hidden by rocks on both sides. We eventually reached the end of the tracks, where a Jeep was parked in the sand near the water, and some footsteps led right into the ocean itself. Shoot, we wouldn't be able to track them through the water, and there were so many different ways they could have gone. My heart ached as the hope inside of me began to die. I stared into the same crystal blue waters that I had just hours before, but now with an outlook of despair. I felt like I was never going to see her again. I looked over to Mike.
I have an idea.
I'd never ridden a jet ski before, but I was gonna have to learn quick. It was easy enough to get the hang of, and I soon found myself focusing more on looking for the boat than worrying about the controls. We were back in front of the Grand Maritime Resort now. There was a little speedboat whipping across the current in the distance. A woman sat up and jumped off of the boat. She was thrashing in the water, swimming back towards the coast. The driver of the boat turned back and pulled her back in.
Did you see that?
Yeah, that was weird. Let's keep an eye on them. So we did our best to follow this boat, making sure not to get too close or to follow him too directly at any point. We zigzagged our way around, just staying barely within an eye shot. Eventually, the boat pulled in next to a much larger ship, which was anchored out at sea. The guy tied a rope tethering him to the larger ship, then climbed aboard, dragging the woman with him.
You park yours up next to the speedboat. I'll hold mine along the other side of the ship and swim back around to the side. That way, if they see yours, we'll have a backup to escape on.
This was it. If we didn't find Lucy here, I was probably never going to see her again. I parked the jet ski and climbed onto the boat. We headed down a dark metal hallway, trying to keep our footsteps as quiet as possible. As we traveled down, the sound of music thumping from another room got louder. Some kind of party was going on the other side of this wall. There was a door on the side, or we could just continue further down the hall into the dark. I decided to peek inside of the door and opened it just a crack. It was a huge room, dark with vibrant neon lights. Tons of people dressed up sat at slot machines and blackjack tables. I quickly and quietly closed the door, hoping I hadn't been noticed. I nodded my head at Mike to continue further down the corridor, which we couldn't see the end of because of the dark. Mike put his hand out in front of me to stop. He motioned to his ear, and I listened. I could hear breathing at the end of the hallway. There was no doubt that someone was standing guard. We knew he was there, and he knew we were here. Then, as if to break the silence and tension, his voice called out in the dark and told us we weren't allowed back here and to head back into the casino. Mike whispered for me to keep quiet, then spoke out to the guy.
Excuse me, sir. I was just looking for my wife. I believe she may have wandered back this way.
The guard told him that nobody had been through this way, but Mike insisted he double check. We heard the door he was guarding creak open, and Mike dragged me forward into the dark to where we could see the end of the hall. He yanked on the door, but it had automatically locked, so he hid in the corner behind the door.
Stand over there and wait for him to come through.
I could see where Mike was going with this. I wasn't convinced it would work, but I couldn't come up with much better. The guard came back through the door and saw me standing in the hall. I said nothing. He told me that nobody had gotten back there.
Thanks anyway.
The voice came from behind him as Mike jumped on the guy's back, taking him by surprise before he had a chance to close the door behind him. I bolted through the door and made it. It slammed shut with a huge metallic clang. I would be on my own from here on out. The room I found myself in was some kind of lab. There were several rows of operation tables and these vertical tubes with a blue glow emanating from them. I inspected the first one. It seemed to just be an empty water tank, though it did contain what looked like kind of a scuba regulator at the end of a tube. Before I could inspect any further, I heard a door being unlocked and I quickly dove behind the tank to hide.
We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. Please, I just want to get my husband and go back to my hotel. Hey, what do you think you're doing? Get your hands off me.
Two men who looked to be employees of the casino slammed this woman to the operating table with her screaming all the while. I couldn't see fully what they were doing to her from where I was, but I did see the man's pants drop at his ankles, and based on the screams, I'm sure you can guess the rest. It was hard enough to stand by and let this happen, but I also kept imagining my Lucy in the same situation. My fists were shaking with rage. I was gritting my teeth and I could barely contain myself. Still, I had the advantage of them not knowing I was here, and if I was gonna have any chance, I had to keep it that way. The girl on the table seemed to just give up the fight, and the man doing the thrusting said 10-1, then spewed out a bunch of different numbers, as if he was some kind of twisted odds maker. Then the girl, now stark naked, was pushed out into another room. Then the guy followed her out there with a rifle gun. Whoa, I was in way over my head. I had no way to defend myself against that. I had to find Lucy and get out of there without getting caught. The first guy went into a different door, and it looked like he headed up some stairs. I jumped up to investigate the rest of the lab. There were more of these water tanks stretching down the length of the room. What I found was that many of them contained women, again, completely exposed, breathing through tubes. I recognized one of them as the lady we'd seen jump off the speedboat earlier. The next girl looked in much worse shape. Her skin looked charred and her hair was standing up in every direction. My hope was dwindling, but what happened next, I can't even explain the feeling that shot through me. It was Lucy. I nearly blacked out upon seeing her. I was feeling every emotion a person can feel all at once. Her eyes were closed and she was just gracefully floating there, breathing through a mask, but definitely breathing. I knocked on the glass, unsure of how to get her out. She didn't hear. I knocked harder and her eyes shot open. You could just see that they were immediately filled with fear, that she'd been conditioned to expect abuse. But once she recognized me, everything changed. She put her hand up to the glass and I reached up and did the same. Once again, I heard the door unlock and I ducked into hiding. This time, it was two men. One looked like a native to the island. The other was a foreigner. Both were wearing suits. The foreign guy had a drink in his hand. He was overweight and seemed to have a breathing problem. There was a metal tube coming out of his neck that seemed to be regulating his respiratory system.
That was really quite a show you put on there, I must say. I do understand the relevance of games 2 and 3 when making such decisions, but what was the point of the first game?
The Islander guy responded, simply to break them.
I see. Well, this one performed beautifully. A fine specimen indeed. No doubt I'll be willing to shell out for her.
They started talking prices and times. That was it. I couldn't stand by anymore and watch this freaking guy whore out my girlfriend. I didn't care if I got myself killed. I couldn't sit there and hide anymore. I crawled out. The guy didn't see me. I got a running start and knocked the in the face full speed. I shattered my fist, but I didn't even realize it at the time. Before he knew what hit him, I grabbed the fat by the back of the neck and thrashed his face into the glass. It didn't budge, but it must have set off some kind of alarm and a red light started flashing. I thrust his face into the glass 2, 3, 4 times before it started to show a crack, which I noticed on the growing splotch of liquid red now on the surface of the window. I reared back one more time with all my might and shattered the tank on this guy's skull. Water washed out everywhere with a greater force than I had expected. Lucy went sliding across the lab floor. I helped her get to her feet, but there was no time for a heartfelt reunion. We ran for our lives. As we exited, I heard the voices of yelling men behind us. We made it to the hall where I had left Mike and the guard. I wasn't sure where the guard had gone, but it was clear what had happened to Mike. He was beaten to a pulp and left sprawled on the floor. There was no time to mourn. If we were lucky, we might just get out alive. We made it to the hatch. Somehow I was able to pry it open. We were back into the open air, almost home free, but what waited on the other side would be possibly my toughest challenge yet. The guard who had beaten up Mike was standing over the jet ski I had pulled up in, which was on fire, and he continued to pour on the gasoline. He turned around and saw us. Not knowing what else to do, I pushed him, hoping to catch him off balance or something, and somehow it worked. He went crashing down into the flaming vehicle before falling into the water. I had no idea if he'd gotten to the other jet ski, but it was our only hope.
This way!
I took my girlfriend's hand and jumped out into the ocean. We swam like there was no tomorrow.
Where are we going?
The ship billowed its horn over and over. I began to fear it might be a distress call. Still, if we got to the jet ski, there probably wasn't much they could do to catch us. This was it. It all came down to the escape. We turned the corner around the outside of the ship to where Mike's jet ski should have been. But it was gone. So that's it then. It was all for nothing.
There! What's that over there?
Off in the distance was Mike's jet ski. It had just drifted away from the ship. It was a long swim, but we made it.
The rest of the night was mostly a blur. I don't remember much of when we crashed into the shore terrifying the tourists who were enjoying the ocean and moonlight. I don't remember the trip to the emergency room, but I do remember when the pain of what they had done to me finally set in. The police came to talk to us, as did some representatives from the resort. The casino was in international waters, so it was out of the jurisdiction of the law. But they told us they were doing everything they could do to stop abductions on the land and keep tourists informed on the dangers of gambling offshore. They had warnings posted all over the island, but that didn't stop people from being drawn to the thrill, and they would find other ways to lure people in. The resort wasn't involved in any of this, but of course they told us they would be striving to improve their security on the beach and make sure people knew what dangers lie beyond their walls. They were kind enough to pay our medical bill, and we wouldn't have to worry about paying for our stay either. They even offered a free week at the resort at a time of our choosing. But I already knew we would never be coming back.
The pain of my broken hand was really starting to set in. The police wanted to know more about Mike and his wife, but we didn't have much information to help them, other than the fact that his wife was still out there. I asked if trafficking had always been a problem on this island. His response made everything that had happened that night seem even scarier. He scoffed at me and said, "If only it was just trafficking." Thanks for listening to all Dente Creepypasta. Your total today comes out to $4,000, but if you like this video right now, I'll waive that fee and give you everything you just listened to, complimentary, all-inclusive. I was joined this time by a tirade of talented narrators, including Blackeyed Blonde, That Spooky Guy, Eden, Lady White Rabbit, and Mortis Media. If you like all Dente Creepypasta, I'd recommend each of their channels. I'll leave links to their work in the description. Please take the time to visit their channels. I'd also like to give thanks to Cole Gray for voicing the foreign buyer. He's actually a comedy channel and he's got great stuff. You gotta go check him out. As always, thank OST Maker for putting together the incredible score and Naoya Sakamata for the end theme you're hearing right now. Let me know which stories were your favorite this time, and if you like how we tied this one together. This is essentially going to be the end of Season 1. There will be a compilation episode coming shortly, but then we'll be digging right into Season 2. So if you want to support the channel, you can do so by simply picking up something at the merch store. I recently launched this #KeepYouTubeCreepy line, and a few of the narrators you heard today are featured on that. If you haven't already, remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring that death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one, assuming we both survive.